Are you ready? Because now you will find out, minute by minute, how the most decisive naval battle in history happened, the Battle of Midway. Stay with me here until the end. But if you're new here in the War Room, go ahead and click that big button and subscribe. Also, give the video a thumbs up and share it with all your friends so everyone can be happy. And who won the Jaeger Shop mug, the Michael Whitman one? It was Vorley Menezes, who will receive this beauty as a gift at his doorstep. If you like the content from War Room, please consider supporting us on Apoya C. Go there and check out our goals. Any contribution is very important to us. So let's get to the story. Right after their resounding success at Pearl Harbor, the Japanese put their plan to conquer Asia into action, securing for themselves all the sources of raw materials needed to remain the dominant power in the region. The plan had been devised by Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, commander of the Japanese Combined Fleet, and it worked exactly as intended, raising the Japanese flag over Hong Kong, Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, the Philippines, and a series of small oceanic islands that formed the defensive perimeter of the greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere. However, the Japanese High Command knew that the American aircraft carriers had escaped at Pearl Harbor and needed to be destroyed as a potential threat to their plans. Therefore, a decisive confrontation still needed to be provoked against the American fleet. To make matters worse, the attack carried out by the Americans against Tokyo on April 18, 1942, using bombers that took off from the aircraft carrier United States ship Hornet, dramatically showed the Japanese that their territory was highly vulnerable to such attacks. And it was up to Yamamoto to find a quick solution to the problem. He thought that carrying out a second attack on Pearl Harbor would certainly make the American fleet, including the aircraft carriers, set sail to face him. However, this idea did not move forward due to the large reinforcement in the number of aircraft that the Americans sent to Hawaii. Yamamoto then decided to attack Midway, a small American atoll about 2,000 kilometers northwest of Hawaii. Midway had two small islands, Eastern Island, where runways were built in August 1941, and Sand Island, which housed all the remaining military infrastructure. Although of little importance to the Japanese, Midway was very important to the Americans, because there they maintained an advanced base for submarines and seaplanes, since they also considered the atoll a bomber base to attack Wake Island, which was already occupied by the Japanese. Yamamoto was in a hurry to take advantage of what he considered a moment of advantage. In the May Battle of the Coral Sea, his forces sank the United States ship Lexington and severely damaged the United States ship Yorktown, which the Japanese thought they had also sunk. In this way, the only remaining American aircraft carriers in the Pacific were the United States ship Enterprise and the United States ship Hornet, which made up Task Force 16 under Admiral William Bowhouse. At the same time they attacked Midway, the Japanese would also attack and occupy the Aleutian Islands in Alaska, in an operation devised by the Imperial Army to remove Japan from the range of American bombers based there. The gigantic Japanese strike force was centered around the Kido Butai, or First Carrier Strike Force, commanded by Admiral Chuichi Nagumo, who had already commanded all major Japanese carrier operations since Pearl Harbor. For the attack on Midway, the Kido Butai included the 1st Carrier Division, commanded by Nagumo himself and composed of the aircraft carriers Akagi and Kaga, and the 2nd Carrier Division, under the command of Admiral Tamao Yamaguchi, and composed of the aircraft carriers Hiryu and Soryu. The 4 vessels carried a total of 248 aircraft, including fighters, reconnaissance planes, dive bombers, level bombers, and torpedo bombers. Nagumo could not count on his other aircraft carriers, Shokako and Zuikako, since the Shokako had been seriously damaged in the Battle of the Coral Sea, and the Zuikako had lost half of its aircraft and crews in that battle. Yamamoto was sailing in another formation, aboard the battleship Yamato, escorted by several cruisers and destroyers. In addition, there was also an invasion fleet for Midway, carrying about 5,000 Japanese soldiers who were supposed to occupy the island. Yamamoto's plan was to lure the American fleet into a trap, and that's why he spread his forces into groups over a vast area to prevent the Americans from knowing the real size of the Japanese fleet at first contact. A small flaw in this plan is that the Americans kind of already knew everything. Without raising any suspicion among the Japanese, the United States Navy listening station in Hawaii had partially deciphered their naval encryption code, known as JN-25. With this top-secret advantage in hand, since the beginning of 1942, the Americans had been intercepting an increasing number of Japanese messages that included the term Objective AF, which they weren't exactly sure where it was. That's when, in mid-May, Captain Wilfred Holmes, one of the codebreakers in Hawaii, suggested that the commander of Midway send an unencrypted emergency radio message saying that the island's water desalination machine had broken down. Less than 24 hours after the fake message was sent, the listening station picked up a message saying AF is low on water. In addition to determining the location of the attack, the analysts gave Admiral Chester Nimitz, commander of the United States Pacific Fleet, the date and a complete inventory of the Japanese forces. With this information in hand, Nimitz began his planning to thwart the Japanese action and deliver a heavy blow that could keep the United States in the Pacific game until the arrival of the new aircraft carriers, which were still under construction on the mainland. With Hauser hospitalized for medical treatment, Task Force 16 came under the command of Admiral Raymond Spruance, and it consisted of the aircraft carriers United States Ship Enterprise and United States Ship Hornet, as well as their escort of cruisers and destroyers. But to surprise the Japanese even more, Nimitz insisted on putting the seriously damaged aircraft carrier Yorktown back into battle, which had arrived at Pearl Harbor on May 27th. The minimum repairs needed on the Yorktown were estimated to take 2 weeks, but Nimitz ordered a supreme effort to get it back into action in 72 hours. Therefore, maintenance teams worked nonstop for 3 days to get the ship back in order, and the Yorktown set sail from Pearl Harbor on May 30th, with maintenance teams still making repairs inside. The Yorktown would be the flagship of Admiral Frank Fletcher, commander of Task Force 17, who would support Spruance's forces. At Midway, in early June, Nimitz had managed to deploy a large contingent of aircraft. This was the result of a collaboration between the Navy, the Army, and the Marines of the VICE. The Navy sent 31 Consolidated Patrol Bomber, Consolidated Y, Catalina patrol planes, and 6 brand new Grumman TBF Avenger torpedo bombers, which would mark the operational debut of the model. The Marines sent 19 Douglas Scout Bomber D Dauntless dive bombers and 17 Vought Scout Bomber, 2 U Vindicators, as well as 7 Grumman F-4F Wildcat fighters, and 21 Brewster F-2A Buffaloes. The Army, in turn, sent 17 Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress bombers and 4 Martin B-26 Marauder torpedo bombers, totaling 126 aircraft on the island. To document everything that happened, the Navy had sent the famous filmmaker John Ford to Midway, who at the time had already won 3 Oscars, equipped with several cameras loaded with color film. Yamamoto's plan to approach Midway in separate formations would indeed favor surprise. What if the Americans already knew everything? But it also weakened the ship's anti-aircraft defense, reducing the concentration of fire and making them more vulnerable to enemy aircraft. Other mistakes also accumulated from the beginning. The line of Japanese submarines that Yamamoto had ordered to position east of Midway to spot the arrival of the American force was delayed, allowing Spruance and Fletcher to move into their positions north of the island completely undetected. Another attempt to scout the American fleet in Hawaii using Kawanishi H-8K seaplanes also failed because the aircraft took off from Wake and had to be refueled by submarines halfway to Hawaii. The problem was that the agreed refueling point had been occupied by the United States Navy right after the Japanese had carried out a similar mission in March 1942. Finally, the Japanese Navy did not use radar at that time, unlike the American Navy. Thus, at the beginning of the battle on June 4, 1942, the Japanese Navy was completely blind. On the previous day, June 3, a Catalina had spotted the Japanese occupation force heading for Midway, approaching 930 kilometers southwest of the island, mistakenly identifying it as the main force. Several B-17S and other Catalinas, armed with torpedoes, took off to attack that force, but missed all their targets, except for one Catalina that hit a Japanese tanker with a torpedo. At 4:30 in the morning on June 4, Nagumo launched his first attack wave directed at Midway. The air formation was made up of 36 Aichi-D-3 naval dive bombers and 36 Nakajima B 5-in Kate torpedo bombers escorted by 36 Mitsubishi A6M0 fighters. Let's make an observation here. Even though we know that the Americans had numerous advantages over the Japanese, what could have been just a nice victory turned into a gigantic and even decisive victory because of a single factor: luck. Right after launching his attack force, Nagumo sent out his 8 reconnaissance planes, but one of them was to be launched by the heavy cruiser. Tone had problems and was delayed by 30 minutes. An hour later, one of the Catalinas reported having sighted 2 Japanese aircraft carriers, and Midway's radar picked up the attack force well in advance, allowing the interceptors to take off. The Marine Interception Force was led by Major Floyd Parks and consisted of 4 Wildcats and 20 Buffaloes. The Marines managed to shoot down 5 Kates and 1 Zero, but they were decimated in combat, losing 2 Wildcats and 13 Buffaloes, including Major Parks. This attack virtually destroyed all of Midway's fighter force, and from then on, the island could only rely on the aircraft from the carriers. Although they caused heavy damage, the Japanese had not neutralized the island and signaled to Nagumo the need for a second attack before any landing attempt. The American bombers, which had taken off from Midway, began their attacks on the Japanese carriers at 7:10 in the morning, being met by the fleet's fighter cover, which shot down 17 American aircraft. Among those killed in the action was Major Lofton Henderson, commander of the Dauntless Marine Scout Bombing Squadron. 241 Squadron Henderson was later honored by the Marines, who named the first airfield captured in the Battle of Guadalcanal after him, the iconic Henderson Field. Scattered by the fighters and the ship's anti-aircraft fire, all the American attacks failed to hit the Japanese, and one of the damaged B-26 attempted a suicide attack against the aircraft carrier Akagi, narrowly missing the command bridge where they were. Nagumo and his staff, impacted by the B-26's suicide attack and the report from his first attack wave, at 7:15, Nagumo ordered his reserve aircraft to be armed with regular bombs for use against land targets. And do you remember that little reconnaissance plane that took off late? Now you'll understand why I mentioned luck. Nagumo finally got the report from the cruiser Tone's reconnaissance plane at 8 o'clock a.m., the only one to spot an American aircraft carrier nearby. Yamaguchi urged Nagumo to attack immediately, using the aircraft armed with bombs available on the deck. However, fearing to send an attack force without torpedoes and without fighter escort, Nagumo decided to wait for the Midway attack force, land before attacking the Americans. Meanwhile, the American aircraft carriers began launching their planes at 7 o'clock in the morning, proceeding immediately to the target by order of Admiral Spruance, who decided not to wait to carry out a coordinated attack. Even with the instructions they received, the American pilots had difficulty finding the Japanese aircraft carriers. The Hornets attack group, in fact, made a mistake and went in the wrong direction. Only a single squadron, Torpedo Squadron, 8 with 15 torpedo bomber Douglas Devastator, torpedo bombers followed the correct course. Thus, they found the enemy fleet, alone and without fighter escort. All 15 devastators from Torpedo Squadron, 8, were shot down before reaching the carriers, as well as 9 out of 14 devastators from Torpedo Squadron, 6 and 10 out of 12 torpedo bombers from Torpedo Squadron, 3. All these aircraft were shot down without causing any damage to the Japanese, often due to the unreliable Mark 13 torpedo. At the same time, the unfortunate torpedo bombers from Torpedo Squadron, 3, were drawing the attention of the Japanese carrier fighter cover. At 10 o'clock in the morning, 3 squadrons of Dauntless dive bombers from the Enterprise and the Yorktown were approaching. The commander of that group, Wade McCluskey, was already at the limit of his fuel due to the long time spent searching for the targets. He decided to make one more sweep before returning, and it was precisely during this last sweep that he spotted the trail of a Japanese destroyer sailing to join Nagumo. This is such a pivotal moment in the history of naval warfare that even Admiral Nimitz acknowledged it was only McCluskey's intuition at that moment that saved the American fleet and Midway Island. Coordinated by radio by McCluskey, the 3 squadrons of dive bombers arrived at the same time over Nagumo's fleet, finding it without fighter cover, and with its decks crowded with aircraft being armed and refueled. At 10:22, the aircraft from the Enterprise split into 2 groups, one to attack the Akagi and the other to attack the Kaga. However, in the confusion of the moment, both squadrons ended up diving on the Kaga. That's when Lieutenant Richard Halsey Best, realizing the mistake, broke off his dive and along with his 2 wingmen, went after the Akagi, taking the fury of almost 2 entire squadrons of dive bombers. The Kaga suffered 5 direct hits, with one of the bombs exploding next to the command bridge, instantly killing Captain Shisaku Okada and his staff. Later, McCluskey recalled the moment. "We were diving from all sides to starboard of the carrier. I recognized it as the Kaga, and it was huge, a very satisfying target. I saw a bomb hit right near where I was aiming. I saw the deck twist and explode in all directions, exposing the hangar below. I saw my 500-pound bomb hit right near the bridge. The other 2 100-kilogram bombs hit the aircraft parked on the deck. A few minutes later, it was Akagi's turn to be attacked by the remaining 3 Dauntless, taking a single direct hit that penetrated the deck, and it exploded among the armed and fueled aircraft in the lower hangar, causing a gigantic explosion and starting uncontrollable fires. The last of the 3 squadrons dove on the aircraft carrier Soryu, scoring 3 direct hits that caused massive damage. Within minutes, Kaga, Akagi, and Soryu had turned into floating, blazing wrecks and had to be abandoned immediately. At 11 in the morning, aboard the Hiryu, the only remaining aircraft carrier, Admiral Yamaguchi ordered his strike force to take off immediately, following his instinct from hours earlier. The strike force, made up of 18 VAL dive bombers and 6 escort fighters, found and attacked the aircraft carrier Yorktown at 12 o'clock and 5 minutes, scoring 3 direct hits on the ship's deck and opening a hole in the deck. Yorktown's quick damage control repaired most of the damage, but an hour later, a second attack wave from Hiryu arrived with 10 Kate bombers. This time, the Japanese hit Yorktown with 2 torpedoes, destroying her propulsion and causing her to list 23 degrees to port. In the meantime, an American reconnaissance aircraft had located the Hiryu, and the Enterprise launched 24 Dauntless in one last big effort of the day. At 5 o'clock, 4 bombs hit the deck of the lone Hiryu, immediately setting much of the ship on fire and also forcing a rapid evacuation of her crew. At the beginning of the night, Admiral Teeman Yamaguchi refused to be rescued, choosing to go down with his aircraft carrier. Already in the darkness, while enjoying the great news, Admiral Spruance ordered the immediate withdrawal of his 2 aircraft carriers to the east. fearing a direct nighttime encounter with the battleship Yamato, which could very well prevail in that scenario. On the morning of June 5th, the Americans tried to find Yamamoto's force, but were unsuccessful. At 2:55 in the early morning of June 6th, Yamamoto himself ordered a general withdrawal of his fleet, returning to Japan. But the battle would only end late in the afternoon on June 6th, when the Yorktown, which was being towed to Hawaii, was torpedoed by the Japanese submarine I-168, taking 2 direct hits and sinking the following morning. The simultaneous loss of 4 fleet aircraft carriers ended up proving to be irreparable for Japan. The Imperial Japanese Navy would never again launch large-scale offensives, and from that moment on, Japan went on the defensive in the Pacific. The United States had not only managed to hold Midway and ensure the safety of Hawaii, but also bought enough time for the arrival of their new aircraft carriers, the Essex class and Iowa class battleships, which would finally give them the ability to go on the offensive. Midway became the most decisive naval battle in history, unequivocally changing the course of the Pacific War in just one day. In 1998, the explorer Robert Ballard, who had already located the Titanic and the German battleship Bismarck, found the wreckage of the Yorktown at 50 meters deep, still showing details of its original paint. In October 2019, explorers also announced they had found the wreckage of the Kaga and the Akagi resting on the ocean floor at 5,400 meters deep. But up to the present moment, Soryu and Hiryu remain unknown, hiding in the darkness of the depths of the Pacific Ocean. So did you like this video? Then check out these other videos I picked for you, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell to get notifications. When I post more videos, I'll be here. Thank you again for watching, and here's a big hug from the War Room.